350 guests watched my son introduce a stranger as his mother. My name is Catherine Monroe, and I had just paid $600,000 for the mansion they were standing in. Picture this. Your own son, smiling for the cameras, saying, "She's just part of the staff," while you hold the bouquet you designed for his wedding. That was me, his invisible mother, standing among chandeliers I paid for in a dress his wife called old-fashioned. I had built Monroe Floral and Events from nothing. 30 years of work, 30 years of 4 a.m. flower markets and 16-hour days. Every rose in that ballroom, every centerpiece under that golden light came from my hands. And yet, when the guests asked, "Who arranged these beautiful flowers?" my daughter-in-law Olivia smiled and said, "Oh, our decorator did. She's wonderful help." Help. Staff. The laughter that followed echoed louder than the string quartet. Every petal I'd touched that week suddenly smelled like humiliation. But here's what Olivia didn't know. Every contract, every delivery, every payment for that wedding went through me. Every signature on those invoices, mine. Every bill that kept her fairy tale glowing, mine. The Hastings mansion might have looked like a palace, but it stood on my company's dime. When Michael, my son, raised his glass and said, "To family," I wondered which family he was talking about. He didn't look my way. He looked toward the Hastings, his new in-laws, all designer smiles and inherited manners. That was the moment something in me went quiet. Not broken, just focused. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply watched the lights glint off crystal and thought, let them enjoy this night. Because what they didn't realize was that I hadn't written the last check yet, and by the time this night ended, everyone in that ballroom would understand one thing. You can erase a name from a guest list, but not from a contract. That's when I smiled for the first time all evening. "Enjoy the champagne," I said softly. "It's the last round I'm paying for." They seated me near the kitchen doors, a place where the scent of roasted lamb mixed with dish soap. From my chair, I could see the chandeliers, but not the stage. Every toast sounded distant, as if I were listening through glass. I checked my phone, and there it was, a single notification from the bank app. Pending transaction, Hastings wedding payment, $420,000. I had signed every contract for this night under Monroe Floral and Events. Every vendor, every truck, every light string had my initials. Yet the master of ceremonies announced only one name. "Let's thank our generous patrons of the night, Mr. and Mrs. Hastings." The crowd clapped. Cameras flashed. My name, the one that carried 3 decades of work, wasn't even whispered. A young waiter approached and whispered, "Ma'am, this table is for staff. Would you like to move?" I smiled. "No, this one's perfect." He left, and I stared at the glowing screen again. My company's account held the final payment, frozen, waiting for my confirmation. One tap, and their fairy tale would fade into darkness. They didn't know that. They never thought to ask who signed the invoices or who paid the deposits. They assumed the Hastings family had handled everything. They wanted their name printed in gold on the invitation. I gave them that. In exchange, they gave me a seat near the kitchen. The sound of laughter filled the ballroom. Someone shouted a toast about legacy and success. I lifted my glass of water and whispered, "To illusion." Olivia was across the room, perfect under the lights, a woman who had polished every detail of her image. She never looked my way. Michael stood beside her, smiling as if everything was right in his world. He used to look for me in crowds when he was little, his eyes searching until they found mine. Tonight, he avoided them. I could feel my heartbeat slow, not from sadness, but from clarity. They wanted a show. I was the one who built the stage. The venue manager, Elena Rodriguez, passed behind me. She caught my eye and nodded, a quiet acknowledgement between women who work behind curtains. She knew exactly who signed her checks. She knew the truth. The longer I sat there, the more invisible I became, and strangely, the calmer I felt. The noise of the celebration turned into static, a blur of silk and champagne. In that blur, a new kind of strength took shape. It wasn't the kind that raised voices or demanded apologies. It was the kind that waited, patient and exact, knowing where every wire of this glittering illusion connected. I reached for the napkin and traced my finger along the embroidered H. They called it the Hastings emblem. The thread was fine, expensive, imported from Italy. I knew because my company had ordered it. Every detail, every shimmer of the night belonged to me, yet not a single person in that ballroom could see it. That kind of invisibility can break a person or sharpen them. For me, it did both. So I stayed at that table by the kitchen, sipping my water, surrounded by the hum of other people's celebration. No one knew the wedding they were praising was built on my dime, my labor, my silence. And as I looked at the pending message on my screen again, the thought settled quietly. I decide when this night ends. That morning, before the ceremony, I drove my old Ford Transit van through the vineyards toward the Hastings estate. The air smelled of wet soil and roses wrapped in burlap. My hands, stiff from decades of tying ribbons, rested on the steering wheel like tools that never quite stopped working. The van rattled as I turned into the driveway, joining a parade of gleaming Teslas, Bentleys, and Rolls-Royces lined along the marble entrance. A valet in a crisp black suit waved uncertainly, glancing at the mud on my tires. "Delivery entrance is around back, ma'am." I nodded. "Of course." He smiled with polite confusion. He had no idea that the woman in the dusty van owned half the event happening inside. I parked behind the kitchen. Workers were unloading champagne crates, floral arches, silk drapes, pieces of beauty that my company had created. I carried a box of lilies inside, each stem wrapped carefully like a secret. When I pushed open the service door, I could hear the soft hum of a string quartet warming up. The sound passed through the walls like a reminder of a world I had built, but wasn't invited into. As I arranged the lilies along the entrance table, a memory flashed. Michael, at 6 years old, handing me a crayon drawing of a flower and saying, "Someday, Mom, you'll make the biggest wedding in town." I had laughed then. I never thought that promise would hurt this much to keep. Someone brushed past me. "Are you with Staff Floral?" I looked up. "Something like that." The man hurried off without waiting for an answer. My reflection shimmered in a polished champagne bucket. Lines on my face, a smudge of dust on my cheek, a pair of eyes that had seen too many markets at dawn. Around me, the world sparkled with money. I had built my world with patience, not inheritance. Each bloom in that mansion was a fragment of my life traded for someone else's dream. Outside, the luxury cars gleamed beneath the afternoon sun. I caught sight of Michael stepping out of one, his arm linked with Olivia's. Her dress shimmered like champagne, gold threads catching the light. He looked proud, almost regal, and for a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who ran through my flower shop with a watering can pretending to be a firefighter. Then his eyes met mine. Just for a second. He hesitated, then turned away. Inside, I knelt to fix a fallen ribbon on the grand staircase. From this angle, I could see the guests arriving, heels clicking, perfumes blending, laughter spilling like wine. They didn't notice me. Why would they? Workers disappear once the scene is perfect. I tied the ribbon tighter and whispered to myself, "Perfection doesn't mean respect." When the ceremony began, I stayed behind the glass doors, watching. The violinist played, the guests sighed at the bride's entrance, and Michael's voice trembled as he said his vows. Every detail matched Olivia's vision board, down to the lilies, the same ones I had chosen years ago for my own wedding. Back then, lilies meant devotion. Today, they felt like irony in bloom. A photographer backed up, nearly stepping on me. "Sorry, staff." I nodded again. "No problem." They saw uniforms, not people. But I didn't mind the misunderstanding. Invisibility has its benefits. It lets you see what others hide. I watched Olivia whisper something to her maid of honor, laughing behind a manicured hand. Michael smiled too, though it didn't reach his eyes. When the vows ended, applause filled the hall. I carried the empty flower boxes out to my van. The sunlight caught the chrome of the parked Teslas, each one gleaming like a mirror. My van, old and scuffed, reflected in their doors. Two worlds touching for a second, both real but never equal. "They measure success by what shines," I murmured, I measure mine by what lasts. Before driving away, I looked back at the mansion. Through the open doors, I could see the chandeliers flickering to life, casting golden light across the ballroom. That light was mine too, bought, arranged, perfected by my hand. The valet from earlier waved goodbye, polite but still uncertain. I raised a hand in return, a small smile playing at the corner of my lips. He'd probably forget me by the end of the night, but that was fine. By tomorrow, no one would forget my name again. When I walked into this ballroom that evening, the light hit me first. 25 chandeliers hung from the ceiling, each one dripping with crystals that caught the gold of the candles. The walls shimmered with mirrored panels, reflecting laughter, gowns, and champagne. Everywhere I looked, the room multiplied itself, an illusion of endless perfection. I stood near the back for a moment, taking it in. Every petal, every ribbon, every single bloom had been touched by my hands. Yet not one person turned when I entered. I was invisible among my own creations. A hostess guided me to a table tucked beside the service station, table 19. The hum of the dishwasher mixed with clinking glasses. My chair wobbled slightly, as if even the furniture understood that I didn't belong. From here I could see everything, the dance floor, the shimmering gowns, the smiles that didn't reach anyone's eyes. Olivia noticed me. She leaned toward her mother, her lips curving into a polite, poisonous smile. "She's comfortable there," she whispered, and I heard it clearly despite the music. A waiter reached across me to pour wine for another guest and spilled a few drops onto my lap. The red stain bloomed against my pale blue dress like a slow bruise. Olivia's laughter drifted across the room. "Oh, it matches her dress now," she said lightly. Margaret, her mother, pressed her lips together to hide a smile. No one offered a napkin. I picked up the corner of the tablecloth, dabbed at the spot, and looked toward the mirrored wall beside me. My reflection stared back, steadier than I felt, older than I remembered, but unbroken. Around me, the room glowed in its expensive disguise, but the mirrors told another story. Beneath the glitter, there was a woman who had worked for decades to build this very moment, only to be erased from it. I watched Olivia glide through the crowd like a swan, her diamond earrings catching every flash. Michael trailed behind her, the perfect groom in the perfect suit. I wondered if he noticed the stain on my dress or if he pretended it wasn't there, the way he pretended I wasn't. The mirrors reflected him too, his face, hers, mine, all trapped together in glass. For a moment, our eyes met in one of those reflections. He looked away first. The band started another song. Guests clapped, heels clicked on marble. The world kept spinning in crystal and champagne, untouched by the quiet storm sitting at table 19. I straightened my back, folded the stained napkin neatly, and set it beside my plate. They could laugh at my dress, ignore my name, and rewrite the story however they liked. The mirrors, however, wouldn't lie. Every time Olivia raised her glass, the reflection showed who truly built the night. The lights glinted against the glass like 1,000 watchful eyes, and I realized something. Being unseen was not the same as being powerless. Power could live in silence too, waiting, patient, biding its time. The laughter grew louder, the music swelled, but all I heard was the faint hum of the mirrors vibrating with truth. My reflection blinked back at me, calm and certain, as if to say, not yet, but soon. The laughter in the ballroom faded into a blur, replaced by the quiet hum of memory. As I sat beneath the chandeliers, I thought of another kind of light, the harsh, flickering one that used to hang above my first flower stand on Oak Street. I could almost smell the mix of soil, rain, and cold metal buckets. 30 years earlier, that was where everything began. After John died on a construction site, it was just me and Michael. The bills stacked up like bricks. I sold our wedding rings to buy my first batch of roses. Every morning, I loaded them into the back of a borrowed truck and drove to the farmer's market. The mornings were dark, and the air burned my lungs. But flowers always found the light. I learned quickly that beauty could be built from exhaustion. My hands cracked from the cold, my back ached from lifting crates. but each bouquet sold meant one more day of keeping our home. By the time Michael started high school, I had a small shop of my own, Monroe Floral and Events. Just a storefront and a dream, but it was ours. I remembered his first graduation. He wore a suit 2 sizes too big, and when they called his name, he turned to the audience, searching until he saw me. He waved so hard his tassel hit his face. That night, he hugged me and said, "Someday, Mom, I'll give you a break. You won't have to work anymore." Now, years later, I was sitting in a mansion filled with my work, his wedding, his promise, and I realized he had kept his word in the cruelest way. He hadn't made me stop working. He had made my work disappear. I looked down at my hands resting on the table. They no longer looked young. The skin was rough, small scars tracing stories of years spent cutting stems and wiring garlands. Once, Michael had called them hero hands. Tonight, no one even saw them. A waiter passed by, refilling glasses. I caught a glimpse of my reflection again, older, quieter, but still standing. My husband used to say, "Dignity doesn't come from silk, it comes from sweat." John's picture still sat on my desk at the shop, a reminder of the man who believed in work more than words. I thought of the nights I stayed up gluing petals for clients who never remembered my name. I thought of the times Michael slept on piles of ribbons, the scent of lilies in his hair. Every sacrifice I had made was built into this room, the golden light, the laughter, the perfection that erased me. They saw a decorator. I saw my life. When the band changed songs, I imagined the rhythm of my old shears, the snip of stems, the rustle of wrapping paper. That was my orchestra, the sound of survival. I closed my eyes for a moment, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel shame. I felt strength. Because everything that sparkled here, the bouquets, the centerpieces, the chandeliers, had been born from those long, raw years of labor. None of them could buy that kind of creation. Michael once told me that success meant not getting your hands dirty. I used to believe him. But tonight, looking at my reflection in that polished glass, I knew better. Clean hands build nothing. I reached for my napkin, wiping the stain that still lingered on my dress. It didn't bother me anymore. It reminded me of where I came from, what I built, and why I would never apologize for it. Behind the ballroom, the air smelled of perfume and power. I was carrying a tray of leftover flowers when I heard her voice, Olivia's, floating from the powder room doorway. "He's done so well escaping his small-town roots," she said, her tone light but sharp enough to cut glass. A woman laughed softly. "His mom still runs that little flower shop, right?" Olivia's heels clicked against the marble. "Used to. We helped her retire." The word retire stung more than I expected. It wasn't true, but it sounded so comfortable coming from her lips, like she had rewritten my life for convenience. I stopped behind the wall, unseen, holding the tray as if it could keep me steady. They didn't know I was there, or maybe they did, and it didn't matter. "She means well," Olivia continued, adjusting her diamond bracelet. "But Michael's worked so hard to distance himself from all that provincial stuff. He deserves to shine." The women murmured their approval. One said, "You've transformed him. He's a Hastings now." I looked down at my hands again. The smell of the roses was sweet and bitter all at once. In those petals lay years of calluses, bills paid, and nights spent standing in the cold while my son studied under warm lights. Provincial stuff, she had called it. My entire life reduced to something embarrassing. I quietly set the tray down and straightened up. Through the reflection in the glass door, I saw myself framed by the ballroom behind me, old-fashioned dress, hair pinned simply, no diamonds, no pretense, just me. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt real. They spoke like my life was a stain, I thought, something to be scrubbed clean before they could hang their portraits. When Olivia and her friends walked out, their laughter trailed behind them like perfume that wouldn't fade. I waited until they disappeared into the lights, then looked down at my left hand. The gold wedding band John had given me still sat there, scratched and faded, but solid. It wasn't worth much, but it had survived decades of work and grief. It was the only piece of gold I ever trusted. I turned the ring slowly with my thumb. He deserved to shine, Olivia had said. But what is shine without a foundation to stand on? You can polish the surface all you want. If the roots are shallow, the bloom won't last. That thought stayed with me as I walked back toward the main hall. The music had changed. The crowd was louder now. The scent of wine and lilies filled the air. I passed the row of mirrors again, catching glimpses of myself between the flashes of sequins and laughter. I remembered how Michael once told me, "Mom, one day we'll live somewhere people don't judge us for working." I had smiled then, thinking he meant freedom. I never imagined he meant escape. From me, from where he came from everything that built him. A passing server stopped me. "Ma'am, are you part of the family?" I met his eyes. "Yes," I said softly. "At least I used to be." He looked confused, then hurried away. I stood there, surrounded by flowers I had arranged, music I had paid for, and people who didn't know my name. The irony of it all settled in like dust on velvet. Fine, quiet, impossible to brush away. I thought of roots again, how they twist underground, unseen but essential. The soil stains them, but that's where life begins. Maybe Olivia was right. I was covered in dirt, but at least my dirt grew something. A burst of applause broke through the music as Olivia and Michael stepped onto the dance floor for their first dance. They looked perfect under the golden light, smiling for cameras, unaware that the ground beneath them was held together by everything they tried to forget. The speeches had begun. Glasses clinked, laughter rolled through the chandeliers, and I sat at table 19, my back to the kitchen door, watching the night move without me. The applause came in waves, polite and predictable. I wondered how many of them realized that every beam of light above their heads came from a contract I had signed. Probably none. The maitre d' passed behind me, whispering to a server, "Keep champagne flowing at the Hastings tables. The others can wait." The others? That was me. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small folder, its corners worn from years of use. Inside were copies of the invoices, contracts, and payment authorizations for this wedding, every signature mine. My name sat neatly in black ink across dozens of pages, invisible in plain sight. A notification blinked on my phone screen. A message from Richard Hanley, my lawyer. "Payment still on hold. Do you wish to proceed?" I stared at it for a long time. All I had to do was tap yes. The music would stop, the lights would go dark, and the fairy tale would collapse in front of them. The power of that silence almost tempted me, but I didn't press anything. Not yet. Across the room, Michael and Olivia greeted guests, their smiles choreographed. His hand rested lightly on her back, his body angled toward her parents. He didn't glance at me once. It wasn't malice, it was habit. He had learned how to erase me with grace. I watched him raise his glass again. "To the Hastings family whose generosity made this night possible." That sentence drew another round of applause. I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not even sadness, but a clarity sharp enough to hurt. The truth wasn't loud, it was patient. I closed the folder and placed it gently on the table, aligning it with the edge of my plate. Then I picked up my phone and called Richard. He answered on the second ring. "Evening, Catherine. Are the payments still pending?" "Yes. The final authorization needs your approval before midnight." "Good. Keep it that way." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. Tonight isn't over yet." I ended the call and looked around the room again. Every conversation sparkled with the kind of arrogance money breeds. I used to think respect came naturally with success, that once I built something from nothing, people would see me differently. But respect isn't given, it's recognized. And sometimes, to be seen, you have to stop serving and start speaking. A server stopped by my table. "Would you like me to take your plate, ma'am?" I smiled. "Not yet. I'm still deciding what's worth keeping." He nodded, unsure what I meant, and walked away. The band began another song, something soft and sentimental. Olivia's laughter carried across the room, bright and rehearsed. I could feel the eyes of her parents scanning the tables, ensuring every detail of their reputation gleamed. That was what this night was about. Not love, not family, but image. I ran my fingers over the fabric of my dress, feeling the texture of old lace. It had belonged to my mother. I wore it tonight not out of nostalgia, but defiance. Every thread reminded me of the women who came before me, who worked, endured, and kept their heads high even when the world pretended not to see them. The song had just ended when my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't from my lawyer, it was from Michael. The message glowed on the screen like a whisper he didn't have the courage to say out loud. "Mom, please don't mention your flower business tonight. This means a lot to me and Olivia." I read it twice, my fingers frozen above the glass. The words were careful, polite, and devastating. Not "please enjoy yourself," not "thank you for helping us," but "don't mention your work." As if the years I spent building that business were something shameful. Around me, the guests laughed and cheered, unaware that my heart had just split between pride and grief. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me until the sting dulled. Then I read the message again, slower this time, each word cutting a little deeper. He didn't want anyone to know. Not that his mother was here, not that she had built the beauty surrounding them, not that every candle flickering on those tables had been lit by her effort. He wanted silence, tidy and convenient. I remembered when silence used to mean love, the quiet dinners after long days, the way he'd fall asleep beside the flower boxes in my old shop. He used to tell me, "Mom, you make everything beautiful." Now he was asking me to hide that same beauty, as if it embarrassed him. I placed the phone face down on the table and stared at my reflection in the wine glass. My eyes looked tired but steady. This was the price of success, I thought. To raise a child into comfort so complete, he forgot what built it. The waiter returned with champagne. "For the toast, ma'am?" I shook my head. "Water's fine." He poured quietly and moved on. I picked up my glass and let the coolness steady my breath. The lights shimmered on the surface, rippling like truth beneath pretense. Across the room, Olivia touched Michael's arm, pointing toward me. He looked over briefly, then away again. They didn't need to say anything. The message on my phone had said it all. I reached for the phone once more, not to reply, but to delete the message. My thumb hovered for a second before pressing the screen. The words disappeared, but the ache remained. It wasn't anger. It was a clean, sharp disappointment, the kind that makes you quieter, not louder. For a while, I simply sat there, watching the celebration unfold. The band started another song, a love ballad meant to fill the air with warmth. Instead, it sounded hollow. I thought of the dozens of times I'd played music in my shop while arranging flowers for other people's weddings, imagining how joy might feel. Tonight, joy had no seat for me. Elena passed by and caught my eye. She didn't speak, but her look said everything. "You okay?" I gave a small nod. Some truths didn't need to be said. My gaze drifted back to Michael. He was laughing again, holding Olivia's hand as photographers circled them. Every flash painted him in gold, erasing shadows, erasing me. But I didn't mind the shadows anymore. That was where I saw things clearly. I touched the faint scar on my palm, the one left by a rose thorn years ago. It had healed unevenly, a small reminder that beauty always asks for something in return. My son's message was just another thorn. I leaned back, watching the chandeliers glimmer like frozen stars, and whispered, "If my work offends them, let the truth do the rest." The phone stayed silent, but inside, something had already begun to move. Not revenge, not anger, something colder, calmer, more deliberate. The kind of resolve that comes when a mother stops begging to be seen and starts preparing to be remembered. The ballroom lights glowed warmer now, and the scent of roses thickened in the air. The dinner courses had been cleared, replaced with dessert plates and gossip. I could hear laughter rising from the nearby tables, the kind that tried too hard to sound effortless. I had been invisible all night, but invisibility never lasts forever. As I reached for my glass, a familiar voice came from the next table. "Catherine, is that you?" I turned, startled. It was Dr. Elaine Miller, one of my oldest clients. She was wearing a navy gown and the same kind smile she'd had the day I decorated her daughter's graduation party. "Elaine," I said, standing automatically. "It's been years." She blinked in disbelief. "You did these flowers, didn't you? I'd recognize your work anywhere." Her husband leaned in. "Wait, you're the florist? From Monroe Floral?" A small laugh escaped me. "Apparently, yes. Tonight I'm also part of the decor." The joke landed sharper than I intended. Elaine's smile faltered. Around us, a few guests paused their conversations. The air shifted, subtle but definite. Someone at her table whispered, "She's the groom's mother, isn't she?" I didn't confirm it, but I didn't deny it either. Silence can answer more powerfully than words. Within minutes, the ripple began. One table leaned to another, glances darted across crystal glasses. It was the kind of quiet that travels fast, whispers dressed as curiosity. I watched it spread. People pretending not to stare, pretending they hadn't just realized that the woman sitting by the kitchen wasn't staff, but blood. A few avoided my eyes, others studied me as though fitting a puzzle piece they hadn't known was missing. Across the room, Olivia noticed. Her smile tightened, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. She turned to Michael, whispering something that made him glance my way. For a second, our eyes met. He looked panicked, as if recognition itself were dangerous. I stayed still, stayed. The less I moved, the more they saw. Elaine touched my hand gently. "You must be so proud of him," she said softly. I looked at her and smiled, not bitterly, just honestly. Pride is a complicated thing. The orchestra began another song, but the melody couldn't mask the tension. I could feel the shift, small, almost imperceptible, but real. The illusion of perfection had cracked. Every smile looked tighter, every laugh more deliberate. Whispers continued to bloom like wildflowers, uncontrollable, unstoppable. "She paid for everything," someone murmured. "The venue, the flowers, all hers." I pretended not to hear, but inside I felt something strange and steady take root. It wasn't revenge. It was visibility. Elena caught my eye from across the room, a half smile acknowledging what was unfolding. She knew it too. The stage was changing. The guests were beginning to see what Olivia had worked so hard to hide. I lifted my glass slightly in her direction, a quiet toast. "Recognition spreads faster than champagne," I murmured under my breath. The truth had found its way into the room, uninvited but unstoppable. It glided between tables and shimmered off mirrored walls. Even those who didn't understand the full story could sense it. Something had shifted in the balance of this celebration. Michael left Olivia's side and started toward me. For a moment, I thought he might finally say something. Acknowledge me, explain, apologize, anything. But halfway across the floor, a guest stopped him to shake his hand. He turned back, trapped again in the performance of being the perfect son-in-law. I sat back and watched. I didn't need to move anymore. The truth was already walking for me. The chandeliers reflected every glance, every flicker of discomfort, every forced smile. The room had become a mirror maze, showing them what they didn't want to see. I took a slow breath, letting the noise of the room fill the silence inside me. Being invisible had its advantages, but being seen, truly seen, had its own kind of power. I smiled to myself and whispered, "Funny thing about gossip, it only works when it's true." The music softened, and waiters began pouring another round of champagne. I sat quietly, tracing the edge of my napkin while the air buzzed with curiosity. I could feel it now, the shift. People who hadn't looked at me all evening were stealing glances, whispering behind manicured hands. I didn't need to turn to know who had started it. Recognition, once released, had a way of spreading faster than perfume. Olivia must have felt it too. She glided toward me, her gown shimmering like molten gold under the chandeliers. The crowd instinctively made space for her, the way people move aside for a queen or a storm. She stopped beside my table, her expression fixed in a polite smile sharp enough to cut. "Mother-in-law," she said sweetly, her voice honeyed with tension, "you're causing quite a stir. Maybe wear something less vintage next time." Her tone was light, her words precise, the kind of insult that could pass as etiquette. I looked up at her, calm, steady. "This old dress?" I said, smoothing the fabric over my knees. "It paid for your first mortgage payment, dear." The silence that followed was sudden and heavy. Nearby conversations froze. Even the orchestra seemed unsure whether to continue. Olivia blinked, the smile slipping just a little before she found it again. "How generous of you," she said, her cheeks coloring under the light. Michael appeared behind her, his jaw tight. "Mom, please," he whispered, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "Not tonight." I met his eyes, tired of the same plea, tired of swallowing truth for the sake of comfort. "Then when?" I asked softly. "When the thank you note arrives?" He looked away, lips parting, but no sound came. Around us, the ballroom held its breath. Olivia recovered first. "We're all very grateful for your help," she said, the word help bending in her mouth like something sour. "But let's not make this evening about business." I smiled, not out of cruelty but composure. "I couldn't agree more. Let's make it about respect." Her posture stiffened. "Excuse me?" "Respect," I repeated, setting down my glass. "It shouldn't be reserved for the people at the front table." Michael reached for Olivia's hand. "Let's go," he muttered. But she didn't move. She was too proud, too used to winning. I could see the guests watching from the corners of their eyes. No one dared interrupt, but everyone listened. The performance had turned into something unscripted, raw, and painfully real. "I didn't mean to offend you," Olivia said finally, her voice sharp now. "You just seem out of place." I stood, smoothing my skirt again. The lights caught the faint stain from earlier, the one no one had apologized for. "Out of place?" I said quietly. "Maybe, but you're standing on ground I built." Her mouth opened, but I didn't give her time to speak. "You know, vintage lasts longer than gratitude. It's durable. It survives." The orchestra began playing again, awkwardly filling the silence with strings that trembled. Olivia forced a laugh, but her voice shook. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," she said, turning on her heel. Michael lingered for a heartbeat, looking torn between two worlds, the one he was born from and the one he was trying to impress. I wanted to reach out to him, to remind him who he was before the gold and glass and polite cruelty, but I didn't. He needed to feel the distance he'd created. He followed her, shoulders tense. The crowd pretended to return to their conversations, but the air was different now. The illusion of perfection had cracked again, and this time the sound was louder. I sat back down, my pulse steady. The confrontation hadn't given me satisfaction, only clarity. They could call me old, unfashionable, outdated. What they couldn't call me was powerless. I stepped out onto the terrace to breathe. The night air was cooler there, scented with lavender from the garden I had helped design. From inside, laughter spilled through the open doors, bright and brittle. The chandeliers flickered against the glass like fireflies caught in a cage. For the first time that evening, I was alone. I pulled the folder from my purse and opened it beneath the glow of a lantern. The pages rustled softly in the breeze. Contracts, invoices, authorizations, all signed by me. Every signature was a promise I had kept. I traced one with my finger, the ink smooth under the lamplight. 30 years of building, one night of being erased. It was almost poetic. A voice broke the quiet. "Mrs. Monroe?" I looked up to see Elena Rodriguez, the venue manager, walking toward me. Her clipboard was pressed tightly against her chest. The reflection of the ballroom lights shimmered in her dark eyes. "Elena," I said. "How's everything running?" "Smoothly," she replied, lowering her voice. "But we're approaching the final payment window. 9 p.m. cutoff. Do you still want me to hold it?" I closed the folder slowly, meeting her gaze. "Yes, hold it." She hesitated, glancing back toward the ballroom. You mean until after the reception? Until I decide this celebration deserves completion. Her brow furrowed. I think I understand. You do, I said. Better than most. The corners of her mouth lifted, faint but sure. Then I'll keep the system paused. No one here will notice until the transaction fails. Perfect. Elena nodded once, professional and loyal. She turned to go, but I stopped her. Elena, I said softly, thank you. She looked back. I work for people like you, Mrs. Monroe, the ones who build the magic and never get invited to sit under it. Her words hit harder than I expected. When she disappeared inside, I stayed there a while longer, watching the reflection of the chandeliers tremble in the glass doors. Behind them, people were dancing and drinking, celebrating the illusion of their own generosity. I slipped the contract back into my purse and zipped it shut. The faint echo of music drifted out, but the rhythm felt distant, foreign. My heart beat slower now, steady, deliberate. Power didn't have to shout. It could live quietly, waiting in the space between signatures. When I turned to go back inside, the night breeze tugged at my hair. For a moment, I saw my reflection in the window, my face framed by the glittering lights behind me. The woman staring back wasn't humiliated anymore. She was calculating, calm, and unafraid. Inside, the party continued as if nothing had shifted. Waiters glided across the marble floor, glasses refilled, the orchestra played something bright and shallow. But beneath it all, a countdown had begun, and I was the only one who knew it. I found my seat again at table 18. The same waiter who had spilled wine earlier came by, nervous now. More water, ma'am? I smiled. No, thank you. I'm saving room for the truth. He blinked, unsure how to respond, then hurried away. I looked at my phone. 8:15 p.m., 45 minutes until the cutoff. The guests had no idea their fairy tale evening was built on a timer. One decision from me, and the lights, the music, the luxury they worshipped would all stop. Not out of spite, but principle. I lifted my gaze to the grand chandeliers once more. They glowed like stars, fragile and temporary. Every bulb, every bouquet, every sound in that mansion was running on borrowed grace, mine. The night had grown louder, almost feverish. The band played a glittering jazz tune while guests circled the dance floor, their laughter floating like bubbles that never burst. From my seat at table 19, I could see everything, the sparkle, the smiles, the way Olivia posed, as if the night itself existed to adore her. It would have been beautiful, if only it weren't built on lies. A few tables away, a young man with a press badge hanging from his pocket was talking to a waiter. His camera hung loose around his neck, the lens glinting under the chandeliers. I recognized him instantly, David Nguyen, a reporter from the Sonoma Social Register. I had met him years ago when he covered a charity gala I designed. Back then, he'd written an article about the woman behind the beauty. Tonight, he was here to photograph the Hastings family spectacle. He caught my eye, surprised. "Mrs. Monroe," he mouthed. I smiled faintly and motioned for him to come over. He approached with polite hesitation, his voice low. "It's been a while," he said. "I almost didn't recognize you. You're working this event?" "Something like that," I replied, my tone dry enough to sting. His gaze flicked toward the ballroom. "Rumor says the Hastings dropped $500,000 on this wedding. Is that true?" 600, I corrected. "Every cent accounted for." He gave a small whistle. "Impressive. They must really like making headlines." "They will," I said. "Just not the kind they expect." He tilted his head, studying me. "I heard there's some confusion about payments. People are talking." I leaned forward slightly, my voice calm. "No confusion. Just clarity waiting for the right moment." He blinked, intrigued. "So there is a story." "There always is," I said. "Some stories just bloom later than others." He grinned, already sensing the spark of scandal. "Would you mind if I quote that?" I looked past him, watching Olivia's laughter echo through the room, sweet and hollow. "Every mother has a story," I said softly. "Mine just happens to cost $600,000. David's expression shifted, half amused, half impressed. "You always did have a way with words." He lifted his phone, ready to take a note. "Not tonight," I said, stopping him. "Tonight, I just want people to see." He nodded slowly, understanding more than I said. Then he gave a small, respectful bow of his head. "Then I'll be watching," he murmured, and slipped back into the crowd. I watched him go, the faint hum of curiosity following in his wake. It spread fast, through whispers, glances, and half-heard questions. "Who is she? Why did she say that? Didn't she pay for the flowers?" Within minutes, the murmurs grew louder than the music. Guests pulled out their phones under the tablecloths, scrolling, texting. Faces turned subtly in my direction, then quickly away. Olivia noticed first. Her laughter faltered, her eyes scanning the room. She could feel it, the attention shifting, the story slipping out of her control. Her mother leaned in, whispering sharply. Preston Sr. frowned, checking his watch as if time itself had betrayed him. I sat still, my posture straight, my hands folded neatly on the table. I didn't need to do anything. The truth was pollen. Once released, it carried itself on the air. From across the ballroom, Elena caught my eye and gave a slight nod. It wasn't approval or encouragement. It was confirmation. Everything was moving exactly as it needed to. The chandeliers above shimmered brighter for a moment, refracting light in 100 directions. Reflections danced across the mirrored walls like secrets set free. I felt no guilt, no thrill, only a steady certainty. This was never about revenge. It was about correction, about balance. I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip. The taste was sharp and clean, like honesty. "Stories bloom faster when watered with arrogance," I murmured. The clinking of silverware on crystal silenced the whispers. Preston Hastings Sr. rose from the head table, holding his champagne flute high. His tuxedo gleamed, every gesture rehearsed, every word polished by a lifetime of speeches. The crowd turned to him like sunflowers to light. "Friends," he began, voice rich and smooth, "tonight we celebrate the union of two wonderful families, the Hastings and the Monroes." He paused for effect, flashing the kind of smile that belonged on a campaign billboard. "And I must say, this mansion has never looked more magnificent, thanks to our talented decorator, Catherine Monroe, who outdid herself." A wave of applause rolled through the ballroom. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. Decorator. Not mother, not family, just help with better lighting. Olivia's laughter cut through the clapping as she took the microphone from her father. "Yes, Daddy," she said sweetly, glancing toward me. "Michael's been blessed with a second family who truly understands refinement." The guests chuckled on cue. Michael smiled stiffly, his eyes darting between his wife and me. I could see it, the silent panic of a man realizing the room might be turning. I lifted my glass, pretending to toast. Inside, I felt the smallest tremor of pity for him. He had traded love for acceptance, and now he was watching both crumble under crystal chandeliers. Preston continued, "Let us raise our glasses to love, legacy, and the families who make evenings like this possible." I took a slow breath, staring at the bubbles rising in my glass. They toasted a lie, I whispered to myself, and I was paying for the champagne. A few nearby guests glanced at me, unsure whether they'd heard right. I smiled faintly and sipped. The sweetness burned. Across the room, David Nguyen, the reporter, had his camera raised. He wasn't taking pictures anymore. He was recording. I didn't stop him. The truth deserved its own archive. Olivia leaned close to Michael, whispering through clenched teeth. Whatever she said made his shoulders tense. He murmured something back, but she only tightened her grip on his arm. They were trapped inside their own performance, each pretending the applause still meant something. As the crowd drank, I studied the faces around me. Businessmen, donors, wives draped in jewels. They applauded illusion, too polite to question it. But beneath the laughter, discomfort was starting to bloom. A few guests who'd overheard the earlier whispers exchanged wary looks. They were beginning to sense the disconnect. The woman they called decorator wasn't hired help. She was ownership disguised in modesty. The violinist struck a wrong note. Small, sharp, but noticeable. For a brief second, the music faltered, and so did the facade. Olivia's eyes flicked toward me again, and I smiled, just enough to make her unsure whether it was defiance or amusement. Michael raised his glass halfway, his voice uncertain. "To family," he echoed, but the words hung awkwardly in the air. "To family," Preston repeated firmly, forcing the crowd to follow. "To family," I whispered, and set my glass down without drinking. The applause swelled once more, filling the cracks in the room like spackle over rotting wood. When it ended, conversation resumed, forced and fragile. Laughter returned, but it rang thinner now. I stared into my untouched champagne, the bubbles bursting quietly against the glass. They reminded me of promises, beautiful, brief, and empty. Then I stood, just long enough to adjust my chair, and caught David's gaze from across the room. He mouthed one word, "Soon?" I nodded once. The night had reached that polished hour when everyone was tipsy enough to believe the performance. Laughter rippled across the ballroom, lights shimmered through crystal glasses, and the air smelled of roses and arrogance. I glanced at my phone. 8:30 p.m., 30 minutes until the final payment was due. Elena appeared beside my table, moving with the quiet precision of someone who understood the gravity of silence. She leaned in discreetly. "Final confirmation, Mrs. Monroe?" she whispered. I didn't hesitate. "Hold until 9:15. Her brows lifted slightly. "Understood." She turned to leave, but I added, "If they keep pretending, the lights will show them truth." Elena froze for half a second, then gave a knowing nod. "Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure the timing's perfect." As she disappeared back toward the control station near the bar, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The kind that comes not before chaos, but before balance. I picked up my champagne glass, now warm and flat, and turned it slowly in my hand. Every reflection on that glass was a reminder. This room only sparkled because I allowed it to. Michael appeared then, his expression tight with unease. He glanced around to make sure Olivia wasn't near before sitting down beside me. "Mom," he said under his breath, "what did you mean when you told Elena to wait?" I met his eyes. "You heard that?" "Yeah, and so did half the staff. People are talking." "They've been talking all night," I replied evenly. "It's about time they listened instead." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "You're making people uncomfortable." "So does betrayal, dear," I said softly. "But at least it's honest." He blinked, startled by my composure. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who brought me daisies in a paper cup after school, saying, "For your shop, Mom." But that boy had grown into a man who measured love by how well it fit a photograph. "Please," he said quietly, "don't do anything tonight. Olivia's stressed enough." I looked at him carefully. "You think I'm here to embarrass you?" He didn't answer. Silence was its own confession. "I came here to celebrate," I said. "But I suppose not everyone celebrates the same way. Some raise glasses, some raise invoices." He flinched, but before he could respond, Olivia called from across the room, "Michael, they're waiting for us!" He stood up quickly, relieved for the excuse. "Just don't make this worse," he murmured, and walked away. I watched him rejoin his new family, smiling for photographs as though nothing existed outside the frame. For years, I had built events like this for other people, lavish, temporary, beautifully false. I knew exactly how long illusions lasted, until the bill came due. The clock on the far wall ticked toward 9. The sound was soft but constant, like a heartbeat in a quiet room. I imagined the power cables running through the walls, the music system, the caterers, the lighting, all connected to accounts with my signature. Preston Hastings Sr. stood at the bar, bragging loudly about the family's generosity. "We spare no expense for our daughter," he said, his voice carrying. "Hastings hospitality, that's what people remember." I smiled to myself. "Let's test that," I whispered. David Nguyen, the reporter, was still nearby, pretending to adjust his camera. Our eyes met again. He didn't need words to understand something was coming. He raised his glass slightly, a silent toast to truth. 8:50. The guests gathered again near the stage for another speech. Olivia's laughter echoed across the hall, bright, defiant, desperate. I could see the tension behind her perfect smile, the cracks beginning to show. 8:55. A server tripped slightly near the head table, spilling champagne. Preston frowned. Olivia snapped at him under her breath. The polished evening was unraveling, thread by thread. I checked my phone one last time. 9:00. I took a deep breath, letting the air fill my lungs. Power didn't always roar. Sometimes it waited. Sometimes it ticked. If they treat respect like a luxury item, I murmured, let's see if they can afford it. Preston Hastings Sr. tapped his spoon against a glass, and the chatter faded instantly. The orchestra softened, leaving the hum of expectation in the air. He stood at the head table, radiant with self-importance, the golden patriarch under his own chandelier. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "tonight is more than a wedding. It's the merging of two remarkable families." His voice rolled through the room like champagne, smooth, effervescent, practiced. "And of course, none of this would be possible without the guidance of my son, Preston Hastings Jr., who helped raise such an honorable young man." Applause thundered. I sat still, the sound washing over me like static. Honorable. My late husband's name was John Monroe. The only Preston who ever shaped my son was sitting there, basking in stolen credit. The applause stretched on. The chandelier above shimmered. My pulse didn't quicken. It steadied. I'd waited long enough. When the clapping finally ebbed, I rose from my seat. The motion was quiet, almost gentle, but heads turned instinctively. My chair scraped softly against the marble floor, a sound small but impossible to ignore. "Excuse me," I said. The microphone on the stage picked up my voice as if the room had been waiting for it. The echo was sharp, startling, alive. Conversations died mid-sentence. The musicians froze. I walked slowly toward the stage, my heels tapping against the floor in measured rhythm. Each step felt like reclaiming a heartbeat I'd lost years ago. Michael half rose from his seat. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Don't." I didn't look at him. "Too late," I said softly. "You already did." When I reached the front, I stood beneath the chandeliers, facing a sea of faces, some curious, some horrified, some already understanding. Olivia's eyes widened, her perfect smile faltering as I took the microphone from the stand. "Good evening," I began, my tone calm and even. "My name is Catherine Monroe." The silence that followed was complete. "I am Michael's mother." A ripple went through the crowd. It wasn't noise, it was recognition. Small gasps, shifting chairs, the sound of illusion breaking. "I just thought it was time we met properly," I continued. "After all, I've been here since sunrise, every day this week. You've all admired the flowers, the lights, the decor. I arranged every bloom. I signed every contract. I paid for every beam of light that shines on your faces tonight." Olivia rose to her feet, her voice strained. "Mrs. Monroe, maybe this isn't—" I turned to her, smiling politely. "Please, Olivia, you've had your speeches. Let me have mine." Preston Sr. stood, his voice loud and trembling. "This is highly inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" I said, meeting his gaze. "You called me staff in a mansion I funded. You raised a glass to my labor and toasted it as your legacy. I'd say that's the definition of inappropriate." Murmurs filled the air. I could see David Nguyen at the back of the room, his camera raised again, capturing every second. The Hastings expressions hardened, their composure cracking like porcelain under heat. Michael's voice shook. "Mom, please, just sit down." I looked at him, not with anger, but with sorrow. "Sit down?" I repeated quietly. "I did, Michael. For 30 years. I sat through every sacrifice, every humiliation, every moment you thought I wouldn't notice you pulling away. And now I'm done sitting." No one moved. Even the waiters had stopped mid-service. "I don't need applause," I said. "I don't need gratitude. I just need truth. You called me staff. I built this night, flower by flower, and you called me staff." The chandelier lights shimmered above us, refracting against crystal glasses and teary eyes. For the first time, the room saw me, not as decoration, not as help, but as the foundation holding everything up. I set the microphone gently back on the stand. "Enjoy the evening," I said softly. "It's about to change." Then I turned and walked off the stage. The room was still trembling from my words when I turned back toward the crowd. The chandeliers hummed faintly, the sound of their crystals brushing against each other like breath. I could feel the weight of every gaze, Michael frozen beside Olivia, Preston Sr. gripping his champagne glass so tightly I thought it might shatter, Margaret pale and rigid, a statue of poise turned brittle. I reached into my purse and pulled out the folder I had carried all evening. Slowly, deliberately, I placed it on the edge of the stage. The soft thud echoed like a gavel. "Since everyone loves transparency," I said, my voice calm, "let's continue the celebration with a little honesty." I opened the folder and spread the papers across the podium, contracts, invoices, receipts, each one stamped with the Monroe Floral and Events logo, each one bearing my signature. "This," I said, lifting the first page, "is the contract for this venue, the Hastings Mansion Estate. $230,000, paid in full by Monroe Floral and Events." Gasps rippled through the crowd. I turned another page. "Catering, $120,000, lighting, $75,000, music, furniture, and decorations, another $130,000, flowers, my flowers, $45,000. I paused. "Total cost, $600,000, every cent paid by me." The silence deepened until even the hum of electricity seemed to fade. Preston Sr. slammed his glass down. "This is outrageous!" "What's outrageous," I said, meeting his glare, "is rewriting history while the writer's still alive." He took a step forward, face red. "You're humiliating my family." "I'm correcting the record," I replied. "There's a difference." Olivia's voice quivered. "Mom, please stop." I looked at her coldly. "You don't get to call me that." Her mascara shimmered under the lights, and for a moment I saw fear, real human fear, cross her face. Michael's voice cracked. "Mom, please, this isn't the way." I turned toward him, my tone quieter but sharper. "I did everything the right way for 30 years. I worked, I sacrificed, I gave you everything I had, and for what? To be erased from my own son's wedding?" He looked down, unable to answer. I picked up the champagne glass that Preston had left behind. "You toasted generosity," I said, raising it slightly. "You toasted legacy, but none of you ever asked who paid for the champagne in your hands." Olivia tried to speak, but I cut her off gently. "You wanted prestige, not family, so consider this the invoice." I placed the glass back down, the sound ringing clear. David Nguyen's camera clicked once, twice, 3 times, the truth capturing itself. "This isn't revenge," I said softly, scanning the faces that had once looked through me. "It's documentation. This is what happens when labor meets entitlement, when a mother builds and a world forgets." Someone in the back clapped once, awkwardly, then stopped. The sound hung there, fragile but undeniable. Preston's voice shook with fury. "You'll regret this." I smiled faintly. "No, you will, because the difference between you and me, Mr. Hastings, is that my money came from work. Yours came from illusion. And tonight, illusions expire." Margaret's eyes darted to the exits, as if she could still salvage dignity through distance. Olivia stood motionless beside Michael, her lips trembling, her hand clutching his sleeve for support. Michael whispered, "Mom, please, enough." "Enough?" I said quietly. "Enough is what I told myself every night when I thought it would get better. But tonight isn't about enough. It's about the truth finally having a microphone." I gathered the papers back into the folder and held it against my chest. You raised your glasses to illusion, I said. Now raise your eyes to reality. I turned away from the podium, letting the silence expand behind me like a tide. Each step back toward my table echoed like punctuation at the end of a confession. The ballroom had fallen into a silence so dense that every breath seemed to echo. The chandeliers shimmered, but their light no longer felt warm. It was interrogation light, unflinching, merciless. I stood beside the podium, folder in hand, while the Hastings family sat frozen, their empire of manners collapsing one polished crack at a time. Then came the voice that broke the stillness. "Mrs. Monroe," Elena said, stepping forward from the back of the room. Her tone was professional, steady, but her eyes gleamed with quiet awareness. "Final payment confirmation. $180,000 outstanding." Perfect timing. The entire room turned toward her. Preston Sr. frowned, confused. "What is this?" I smiled faintly. "It's called an ending." Olivia's voice trembled. "You can't possibly mean—" I walked toward Elena and took the folder she carried. Inside was the last check, crisp and perfect, printed on my company account. I held it up for everyone to see, the light catching the inked numbers. $180,000. "This," I said, my voice cutting clean through the air, "is the check that keeps your perfect evening running." The crowd murmured. Even the band had gone still. Preston Sr. rose from his seat, chest puffed with fury. "You can't hold this event hostage." "Oh, I'm not," I replied calmly. "I'm just choosing when to stop paying for my own erasure." He sputtered. "This is disgraceful." "What's disgraceful," I said, "is calling the woman who paid for your daughter's wedding staff." Michael stood abruptly, his face pale. "Mom, please." "Sit down," I said softly. The tone was gentle but final, and for once, he obeyed. I turned to the guests, 350 of them, all dressed in gold and velvet, their phones held discreetly at their sides. "Since you've all been enjoying the evening, it's only fair to tell you what you're celebrating." Every flower, every meal, every drop of champagne was made possible because I built something from nothing. Monroe Floral and Events. I worked, I created, and I paid. A hush rippled through the crowd. Olivia's mother looked as if she might faint. Preston's jaw flexed like a man chewing on humiliation. "But here's the thing about fairy tales," I said, holding the check up higher. "They're beautiful, but they cost something. And tonight, this one ends exactly where it began, with me." And before anyone could stop me, I tore the check in half. The sound cracked through the hall like thunder, then again and again, until nothing but shredded pieces of white paper fluttered from my hands like snow. The gasp that followed was electric. Olivia let out a strangled cry. "You can't do this! This is my wedding!" I looked at her, calm as marble. It was. I turned to Elena. "No final payment, no continued service." "I believe that's standard procedure, isn't it?" Elena nodded, her professionalism unshaken. "Yes, ma'am, standard!" Preston's voice roared. "Do you realize what you've done?" "Yes," I said, glancing toward the chandeliers. "I've turned off the lights on a lie." And as if the universe had been waiting for its cue, the ballroom dimmed. The grand chandeliers flickered once, twice, then went dark, leaving only the soft emergency sconces along the walls. The music stopped mid-note. The illusion died mid-laugh. Gasps filled the room. Waiters froze. Guests stumbled in confusion. The hum of the air conditioners slowed to silence. A single spotlight near the stage flickered and died, leaving the hall in muted gold and shadow. Olivia spun toward her father. "Fix it!" she cried. Preston barked orders to no one in particular. "Get the generator! Call the staff!" But there were no staff left. They were already gathering their things, quietly following Elena's signal. Contracts mattered more than tantrums. I stood at the center of it all, serene. "You toasted lies on my dime," I said. "Consider the tab closed." The reporter's camera flashed once, the crowd's murmurs swelled into chaos, and still I didn't move. Michael looked around helplessly, trapped between the two worlds he had built, one of inheritance and one of truth. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Mom, what have you done?" I met his eyes and said, "I've reminded them who paid the bill." The air felt lighter after that, like justice had finally been given oxygen. Guests began to leave in uneasy clusters. Some glanced at me with pity, others with awe. One woman whispered, "She owned everything tonight." I turned toward Elena, who stood by the double doors, clipboard in hand. "You can shut it down now," I said quietly. She nodded. "Already done." Behind me, the Hastings family stood in the darkness of their own making, their reflection in the mirrored walls fractured and small. I walked toward the exit, the fragments of the check still scattered on the marble floor, gleaming faintly under the fading light. "Some lessons," I said, pausing at the doorway, "need to be taught in the language the privileged understand: currency." The night shattered into confusion the moment I walked away from the stage. What had once been a perfectly choreographed symphony of wealth turned into a low hum of panic. The chandeliers above were still half-dimmed, flickering like the last sparks of a dying performance. I didn't look back at first. I wanted them to sit in the darkness they had built. Then I heard Preston's voice booming across the room. "This is outrageous! You'll regret this, Mrs. Monroe!" I turned, my heels clicking softly against the marble, the only steady sound in a room full of unraveling elegance. "Regret?" I said. "For what? Delivering truth in real time?" He took a furious step forward. "You humiliated my family in front of our entire community." I smiled faintly. "Your family humiliated itself the moment it decided money was worth more than respect." Olivia's sobs pierced the silence. Her mascara had streaked down her cheeks, her perfect wedding makeup melting into ruin. "You've ruined my wedding and my—" she cried, clutching the folds of her golden gown. "No, dear," I said softly. "You ruined your family." Michael stood beside her, pale, eyes darting between us. "Mom, please stop. Please, you've made your point." I looked at him, steady and sad. "No, Michael, you made it when you called me staff." That line hit him like a slap. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The guests were gathering near the doors now, whispering, confused. Some recorded discreetly, others simply stared, unwilling to miss the scandal of the century. The orchestra had abandoned their instruments. The violinist stood motionless, bow hanging at her side. David Nguyen stood by the bar, his camera still recording, his expression unreadable. I didn't mind. Some stories deserved witnesses. Preston pointed at him. "Turn that off. This is private property." David didn't move. "Actually, sir, it's Mrs. Monroe's payment that made this event possible," he said. "Technically, she owns the night." Laughter, nervous, astonished, broke from a few corners of the room. Margaret Hastings shot me a look of pure venom. "You think this makes you noble? You're destroying your own son." I met her gaze without flinching. "No, I'm freeing him." For a long moment, no one spoke. The chandeliers above flickered once more, casting fractured patterns of gold and shadow across the marble floor. Guests' reflections wavered like ghosts, versions of themselves they didn't recognize anymore. Olivia's voice broke again, sharp and brittle. "Michael, do something!" He looked at her, then at me, then back at her again. His voice was small. "I can't." Her expression twisted. "You coward," she hissed, before storming toward the exit, her train dragging across the floor like a wounded banner. Preston followed her, barking orders at staff that no longer existed. Margaret trailed behind, clutching her pearls as if she could hold her crumbling dignity together. And just like that, the Hastings legacy left the room. The guests trickled out next, murmuring fragments of disbelief. "She paid for everything." "Did you hear what she said?" "I can't believe the audacity." Every whisper felt like the truth spreading, finally unfiltered. Michael stayed, alone. He stood there in the half-light, surrounded by the remnants of a dream. confetti scattered on the floor, wine stains blooming on the linens like bruises. His tuxedo looked suddenly ill-fitted, his face boyish and lost. "Mom," he said quietly, "why did you have to do it like this?" I walked toward him, each step measured. "Because the quiet way didn't work," I said. "Because I taught you to speak kindly, but never to stand up for me." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't have to mean it," I replied. "You just had to stay silent. That was enough." He lowered his head, shame pulling his shoulders in. The last of the guests slipped out. Only the staff, my staff, remained, helping Elena clear the tables. The sound of glasses clinking and chairs scraping replaced the orchestra's music. "Mrs. Monroe," Elena said softly, approaching me, "should we turn off the lights completely?" I nodded. "Let them rest." She dimmed the last of the chandeliers until the ballroom glowed faintly, like the aftermath of a storm. Preston's voice still echoed faintly from the hallway, shouting at someone about lawsuits and reputations. But I knew he wouldn't follow through. People like him never risked discovery, they only threatened it. Michael sank into a chair, his voice trembling. "It's all gone, isn't it? Olivia, her family, everything." "Not everything," I said. "Just what wasn't real." He looked up, his face lined with disbelief and grief. "And what's left?" "Whatever you choose to build from truth," I said gently. "It's not too late for that." The faint whir of the cooling system was the only sound left. Somewhere outside, I could hear the distant chirp of crickets, a reminder that the world kept turning even when illusions fell apart. I walked to the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the scent of wilting roses and cooling candle wax. It didn't smell like victory, it smelled like closure. "They wanted a fairy tale," I said quietly, almost to myself. "But fairy tales end when the bill comes due." I turned to Michael one last time. "Respect," I told him, "is like electricity. You only notice it when it's gone." He nodded weakly, tears finally spilling down his face. "I'm sorry, Mom." I gave a small, weary smile. "Don't be sorry. Be different." Then I walked toward the exit, past the dim chandeliers and abandoned champagne flutes, leaving him in the half-light to face what he'd helped create. Outside, the night was cool and clean. The air smelled of rain coming, the kind that washes away everything false. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, letting it fill me. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it walked quietly out of a ballroom, heels echoing through marble, leaving nothing behind but truth. 3 days later, the world woke up to my story. The headlines splashed across every local paper and flooded social media. 600K wedding canceled mid-event. Groom's mother pulls the plug. The photo beneath it showed me standing beneath the chandeliers, microphone in hand, calm while the Hastings family crumbled behind me. I didn't need to read the comments, but I did. Some called me heartless, others called me heroic. Most just couldn't believe a mother had the courage to end her son's wedding with the truth. It didn't matter. The truth was out. By morning, the Hastings brand began to slide. Preston's real estate company was suddenly under review by its investors. Margaret disappeared from her charity boards. Olivia deleted her social media, but the screenshots spread faster than she could erase them. Her insults, her cruelty, her performative posts about humility. It was all unraveling. Not because I spoke loudly, but because silence had finally run out of room to hide. The phone rang that afternoon while I was arranging lilies in my studio. It was Preston Sr. His voice carried that same expensive calm he used at the wedding, only thinner now, stripped of control. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, skipping pleasantries, "this scandal is hurting both of our families. Let's discuss a settlement." I set down the shears and let the petals fall. "A settlement?" "Yes. We can issue a joint statement. Say it was a misunderstanding. I'm willing to compensate you for the damage." I laughed quietly. You still think money buys silence. Everything has a price, Mrs. Monroe. Integrity doesn't, I said. That's why you can't afford it. He fell silent, the weight of those words pressing between us. When he finally spoke, his tone was clipped. You'll regret this. No, I said softly. I already did. Now I'm just done paying for it. I hung up before he could respond. The second call came that evening, from Michael. His voice was raw, quieter than I remembered. Mom, he said, can I come over? I hesitated, staring at the flowers in front of me, white tulips, symbols of forgiveness. Come, I said finally. When he arrived, he looked smaller somehow. His suit was wrinkled, his hair unkempt, the shine gone from his posture. He stood at the doorway like a stranger, unsure if he was welcome. You look tired, I said. I haven't slept much, he admitted. The Hastings cut me off. Olivia left. It's everywhere, Mom. Every headline, every feed. He tried to smile, but it faltered. I guess I'm officially famous. I wiped my hands on a towel and looked at him steadily. Then maybe it's time you learn what to do with a name. He exhaled shakily. I lost everything. I shook my head. You lost what wasn't yours. There's a difference. He stared at the flowers behind me, rows of roses, orchids, lilies, all grown, trimmed, and arranged by hand. I didn't realize how much work it takes to make something beautiful. You didn't want to, I said gently. You wanted the results, not the roots. He flinched but didn't look away. I was ashamed, Mom, of being the florist's son. I thought if I could be like them, I'd finally belong somewhere. And did you? He laughed bitterly. For a while, until the lights went out. I didn't respond. I just handed him a small bouquet, plain daisies tied with twine. Beauty doesn't need chandeliers, Michael. It just needs light that's honest. He looked at the flowers for a long time before whispering, I'm sorry. I know, I said, but apologies don't rebuild. Work does. He nodded, tears slipping down his face. Tell me what to do. I paused, searching his face. He wasn't the boy I had raised, but he wasn't the man from the wedding either. He was something in between, broken maybe, but salvageable. Start with honesty, I said, then build from there. It's slower than lies, but it lasts longer. He wiped his eyes. You still believe in me? I believe in effort, I said. Prove you're willing to try. He gave a small nod. I will. We stood there in the quiet hum of the studio, surrounded by the faint scent of soil and lilies. Outside, the late afternoon light spilled through the glass, soft and forgiving. As he turned to leave, he hesitated. You know, I used to think you worked too hard, he said. Now I think it's the only reason I had anything at all. I smiled faintly. You're learning. After he left, I sat by the window, watching the sun lower behind the vineyards. The last light of day spread across the petals, gold against white. The world outside felt still, like something had finally exhaled after holding its breath too long. The story had gone public, yes, but the real reckoning wasn't online or in headlines. It was here, in the quiet rebuilding of truth. Truth doesn't ruin, I whispered to the empty room. It rebuilds, but only if you're brave enough to face it. A month later, the world had moved on. Scandals burned bright but fast, and while the Hastings name faded from the headlines, my own company, Monroe Floral and Events, was thriving again. Orders doubled. Clients I hadn't heard from in years called to say, "We saw what you did, Catherine. You reminded us that dignity has value." But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady, quiet, free. Every morning, I arrived at my studio before sunrise, just like I used to before weddings and corporate events took over my life. The scent of fresh lilies and damp soil greeted me like old friends. The workers, my people, smiled when they saw me wearing my apron again. "Back to the roots, Mrs. Monroe?" one of them asked. "Exactly," I said, trimming a rose. That's where the truth grows. The radio in the corner played softly, a reporter's voice mentioning the fallout one last time. The Hastings estate has filed for bankruptcy. Several business partnerships dissolved after the wedding scandal. Michael Monroe has left the company, citing personal reflection. I turned the dial off. Enough noise. The story didn't belong to the headlines anymore. It belonged to the lessons it left behind. At noon, the doorbell rang. It was Michael. He looked different this time, simpler. A button-down shirt, rolled sleeves, no luxury watch, no tailored arrogance. Just him. And in his hands, a paper bag. "I brought lunch," he said quietly. "Still trying to make peace through food?" I asked with a faint smile. "It worked when I was 10, he replied. We sat among the rows of flowers, eating sandwiches between trays of tulips and roses. The air smelled like renewal. For a long while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "I got a job," he said, "at the nursery down by the river. It's small but honest." "That's a good start," he nodded. "I didn't tell them my last name. I just wanted to see what it felt like to earn something without it." I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw a man, instead of a frightened boy, pretending to be one. "And?" I asked. "It feels right," he said. "Hard, but right." A quiet pride bloomed in my chest, not loud or grand, just real. "Good," I said softly. "Then you finally understand the family business." He smiled weakly. "Floral design?" I shook my head. "Work." We both laughed then, small, unguarded, fragile laughter that felt like sunlight breaking through a long storm. After lunch, he helped me water the flowers. He worked carefully, mimicking my movements. At one point, I caught him staring at his hands, soft, unused to labor, but trying. "They'll roughen up soon," I said gently. He glanced up. "Like yours?" I nodded. "That's how you know they've built something worth keeping." He smiled faintly, and for a moment, it felt like 30 years hadn't passed between us. That evening, after he left, I stayed behind to close the shop. The sun had dropped low, painting everything gold. I turned off the lights, locked the doors, and stood outside watching the last streaks of orange fade into dusk. A delivery van passed by with the Monroe floral logo printed across its side. I watched it turn the corner, carrying bouquets that would decorate someone else's celebration. A different family, another story, maybe one that would end better than mine began. The air was cool, crisp, with the scent of roses and distant rain. I breathed deeply, feeling the same calm I used to feel when my husband was still alive, and the world was smaller, simpler, more honest. People had asked me since the scandal if I forgave Michael. The truth was, forgiveness had never been the goal. Understanding was, forgiveness puts the past to sleep. Understanding teaches it to speak. And mine had finally spoken. I unlocked the studio again, walked to the workbench, and picked up the first bouquet I'd ever arranged alone, the one I kept preserved under glass. The petals were dry, their color faded to antique ivory, but they were still intact, still holding their shape. "Work keeps dignity alive," my husband used to say, "and dignity doesn't wilt." I whispered the words again, touching the petals lightly. "No, it doesn't." Outside, I saw Michael standing by his car, watching through the glass. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just nodded once, a silent promise. Then he drove away. I turned back to my flowers, arranging the next set for delivery. Each stem found its place, each bloom leaned toward light. As I tied the ribbon, I thought of the wedding night, the chandeliers, the laughter, the humiliation. I thought of how silence had once been my prison, and voice became my freedom. And then, with a faint smile, I whispered to the empty room, "You can erase a name from an invitation, but not from the work that built the walls." The clock struck 7. I turned off the last lamp. The shop was dark, but the flowers glowed faintly in the moonlight, living proof that beauty can grow back after ruin. The world outside was quiet, at peace. And for the first time in my life, so was I.